we don't do these all that often. I sit down and I actually, matter of fact, reach out to people whenever the opportunity presents itself. Last month, it was Gizmo or Martin who had been on an absolutely torrid run in the MLB and really streets of anything DFS purposes. But when we come across an opportunity to sit down and talk to someone who's been on a massive tear that we think we can learn from, and also kind of highlight the amazing success that they've had as a DFS player, and hopefully also using the stochastic tools as well, I look to take an opportunity to do that. So lo and behold, Morgan is here with me today. Just took down the ultimate main event on DraftKings, 830 plus thousand. Amazingly, and by the way, I'm just going to jump right into it. Josh Engelman, who I know you've been following for a while, he had mentioned to me, you chopped that, and he told me that it was 8 different players in the lineup in a 1,300 player field.
Yeah, what's crazy about that is that we shared the pitchers that were both very low owned. So it was a very tiny pitching combination. And then we had 8 separate different hitters. We didn't share a single hitter.
With the exact same identical score.
Identical score.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
What are the odds of something like that happening in 1,300 person field?
I mean, hindsight, 100%.
Yeah, that's right. You also finished 5th, didn't you?
Yeah, I think 1st, 5th, 10th, and 11th.
You, and we'll get into everything here. By the way, I appreciate you joining me, man. We had a nice little conversation before I hit record. I should have had this recording the whole time.
Yeah.
You had mentioned to me, you had DM'd me, and I won't, mention everything. It wasn't really much, but that you had, this was your 7th, I believe, $100,000 plus, so 6-figure win just in 2025 alone.
Yeah, and I used to think when I saw people that would do that a lot, it was regs just chasing Onyx or rakeback status, because I come from a poker background, and back in the day, I don't know if you're aware of this, on Poker Stars there was something called Supernova Elite, and Supernova Elite was their very top tier of rakeback, and it was very generous early on, and there were people that would grind every day that would lose money, and they would intentionally lose money and know they'd be losing money just to get the Supernova Elite benefits, which were worth about 120 or 125,000. And this was, 15 years ago. So inflation adjusted, that's a lot more. I figured, everybody had to be doing that. But I'm certainly not grinding. I'm not even Onyx. So yeah, I feel very lucky and very blessed. Variance has certainly been hitting me the good way this year.
Yeah, it has. But you know what? This is something that, it's setting you up now for, what was the max? Do you know what the max entries allowed was on the main event?
I do, because I was joking about hitting it. The max was 40, and a lot of people had 40. I think the person I tied with, who's a super reg, Fantassin, he had 40.
And what did you have?
I had 12.
Okay. All direct buy-ins, any satellites? So
that's the thing. And I think that's important for people that are watching this that think this is unobtainable for them. If you watch Marvel movies, they have the MacGuffin, if anybody's a film buff, where they even call it now like unobtainium, where, it's just the impossible thing. No direct buys. I don't direct buy these major things. These were all seats that I won.
There you go. And you can chase those through low stakes stuff, obviously a little bit more difficult, but mid stakes, when you look at those satellites to get seats into these main events, and maybe even like those mega millies where it's like the 333 30 like 3333, those types, there are a bunch of different entry levels to get into those satellites. It sounds like what you're saying though is, would you say it's worth it to hit those to try and get tickets? I
think that's the cheat code. And it's weird because we talked about before I came on that some people don't want to, share their secrets or that sort of thing. But for me, the satellites on both FanDuel and DraftKings, that is the actual cheat code. A lot of these 333 seats, I won for $19.
That's crazy. And for what it's worth, Morgan, you can find them. Your handle. What's your handle? Your username over on DraftKings?
CW279.
CW279. Find them over there. You can send them some head-to-heads. But this is one of these things where when I see that, and then I talk to you, and it's like it wasn't just a main event. It was a slew of wins throughout the calendar year. Plus the fact that despite, and this is what's interesting to me, despite all of those wins that you had, you still weren't direct buying into the main event. So you weren't necessarily free rolling it because you're still, you're looking to get in through alternative ways, but you would say you still got in significantly cheaper through playing those satellites than you would have directly buying into 12.
Well, I would never have bought into 12. That's not how I run my DFS. I know some people do, and it makes sense for them. I might not have bought into the first one. I mean, if I didn't have a seat, I would have been very tempted to have, a ticket to the table.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, the math on that, and a lot of people understand this. You go from a 0% chance of winning to something on your first buy-in, and then you get, diminishing returns after that. But I would have been very tempted to buy my first seat. But I was very lucky. I actually had, I think about a week before the ultimate main event, I had a night where I got fourth, but I entered all the satellites that night. I entered like 20 satellites. So that was the night I won. I won, like, they were offering 3 or 4 19 to the 33333, and I won all 4.
Oh, wow.
So really, you could think of this as like a parlay. I was watching you're doing the dingers versus Josh and versus chat. And, this was like a 2 or 3 leg parlay where I had to get, fourth a couple nights ago to get all the seats. And then once I got all the seats, there's a term in poker called Skalansky bucks. That's, theoretical dollars. It's named after a guy named David Skalansky, who was a really good, influential early poker player. Well, that's all that was. It's, I had, $40,000, $50,000 worth of Skalansky bucks, and that's $0 until you turn it into real dollars.
And you did.
I got lucky.
You come from you got lucky, but you're doing something right. And now I know you have some experience with the tools. Yeah. I know you're a sub over at Stochastic. Have you been using the Sims since we released them a couple years ago? Or do you not use the Sims? I haven't asked you any of this. So this is the first time I'm getting any insight into this.
Yeah, I think everybody needs their own process, but I will say this to start with. You need to look at the tools because your opponents are looking at the tools. So we talked about this a little bit before we went live, but DFS is not a sports book. It's closer to either pari-mutuel betting or a poker tournament, where the house is going to take their edge. They're going to take their cut. They're going to take their vig. They're going to take their rake. And then you're playing against the field for the remainder of the money. Yep. You have to have that mindset going in of what your opponents are doing. And so one of the most important things about the tools is to understand how your opponents are approaching any given slate. I think that if you went in blind and just said, oh, I like this because I like this or that sort of thing, you're doing it wrong. And I can say that with utmost confidence.
Hey, when you guys are ready to check the Stochastic tools out for yourself, take 30% off any monthly subscription when you use code Morgan at checkout.
An example on this ultimate main event slate, and this is a really interesting example, actually. I had 0% Hunter Brown on purpose. He was like 46.4% owned. And I made a decision that I would go 0% Hunter Brown. And then what that does is that cuts down the tournament. So instead of 1,300 people, I'm only playing against 650 now. And then we chop that and all the money's out. Now, the opposite can be true. You can make up these scenarios in your head, but again, they're kind of like parlays. If Hunter Brown went out and got 35 points and you just needed him to win, I was dead. I would have actually gotten $0 back. Mm-hmm. And you have to be comfortable with that. That's the other thing. It's about emotional control and bankroll control. That's also why I wouldn't have done a direct buy. I couldn't get mad if Hunter Brown was good. I just was dead. And so knowing that, I had to be at peace with that. And the other part, back in the day, what you used to do, and a lot of, high stakes regs did this even originally, and you would see this, is that, this, I'll go way back, and he's dead now in the plane accident, but like Roy Halladay for the Phillies, he'd be pitching, against the Marlins on the road, and he'd be the best pitcher and, the best pitcher in all the tools. And then you'd see someone win 100,000 stacking 5 Marlins, and, they'd be all under 1% owned. You go, how the heck did they do that? Well, it was because back in the day, no one else was doing that leverage wise. So they were playing like 1 or 3 person tournaments in 1,000 people fields. And now too many people do that. So the other side of this Hunter Brown thing for the ultimate main event, I had 0 Rockies. So it was a weird take where back in the day, this wouldn't have been, the play. You would have said, oh, if I'm fading Hunter Brown, I need to make some Rockies stacks or some Rockies mini stacks. I didn't do either. And the reason for that now, it's just based on what my opponents are doing. Because I didn't want to play against the Rockies stacks. And frankly, even though I didn't think Hunter Brown would be very good, I didn't think the Rockies would be very good either. And that ended up being the case. They won 6-1, but they weren't insane.
Yeah, and I mean, look, by the way, I do remember that distinctly where you had like Salil Sood was one guy who would often back in those days play just 5-man stack every against the chalk pitcher and had an immense amount of success doing that. A lot of people did that. And you're right, it used to work, but you had mentioned that you have a poker background. That clearly, and we know that a lot of many of the best DFS players have a poker background as well, an extensive one at that. How much do you think that has given you an advantage going into DFS? Sitting here listening to you talk about understanding what your opponents are doing, it's a pretty significant crossover there from DFS to poker.
Yeah, I would say, if anybody wants unsolicited advice, I guess I'll give it to them. That's probably one of the biggest mistakes a lot of starting DFS players make, is that they just want to make a fun lineup for themselves. And that's fine. If you're going to treat it recreationally, like you would, going to the movies and watching Fantastic Four, do that. Put in, if you're going to the Phillies game, put in 5 Phillies and hope that Kyle Schwarber hits 4 home runs and, go for it.
It's the same thing as betting a big parlay on a team you love when you go to the game. It's the same
exactly.
thing.
But if you're going to transition away from being a recreational DFS player to trying to be serious about it, even at low stakes, you really have to understand what your opponents are doing. Because, like I said a couple of minutes ago, this is a poker tournament. You're playing against a field, and you have to understand what the field is doing. And the interesting thing you brought up about like Sahil Sud and those Marlin stacks of old and everything. The reason that doesn't work anymore, and the reason I didn't just fire off Rockies for the ultimate main event, is that that's a known strategy now. So other people were going to do that. And I didn't feel like that was going to work. The reason, that quote unquote doesn't work anymore, it's just because too many people are doing it. If it swung the other way on the pendulum and a bunch of people stopped doing that, like yesterday, Garrett Crochet in the early slate was like 77% owned, and people stacked Baltimore. Baltimore was like 5% owned, not like 1% owned or 0.5% owned. So if people stopped doing that, then yeah, it could be viable again. But since people are doing it, it's not viable. And I think that's the other thing. You have to stay flexible, because something that worked, 5 years ago or 3 years ago doesn't necessarily work today. And one of the reasons for that is that the tools are so good. You talked about the stochastic tools. They're not that expensive. You guys have made it very reasonable for people to access. People DM you all the time for free trials and stuff. You just have to assume that the average DFS player is so much smarter now than they were even a year ago. And so you gotta respect your opponents too. And you gotta say, hey, you know what blew me away, Laffy? So I used to be really good at college football. College football DFS was like my jam. I was actually not that great at the other ones, but I raked on college football. And then what started happening is that the tools got really good. The tools were basically non-existent for college football when it started. Everybody was...
When I could play it in Pennsylvania, there were no tools. Information was king.
Yeah, and it was people were shooting arrows in the dark. So, you'd get 50% owned guys that would be zeros. And you'd have min price guys that everybody needed, but were like 5% owned. Well, yesterday I played the opening slate. I got $0 back, and this is back to the bankroll management and emotional control. I was in for a lot. I was in for like $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, which for college football is a lot because the prize pools aren't that big and the buy-ins aren't that big. I not only got 0 back, I was looking at some of the top lineups. I was shocked by how good they were. I was like, holy mother, I have to really rethink what I'm doing here, because that information edge, it's just not there anymore. People can sit down, 25 minutes before lock, and they can build a good lineup with the tools. And that's the respect to your opponent's piece. It's not the Wild West anymore.
Yeah. And it's also not just like there used to be a realm where if you just knew the sport, you could actually be pretty successful. I'm talking back, a decade plus ago, where if you just knew the sport well and you knew the rotations everything else kind of meant less. And what I'm talking about is leverage, ownership, because the field was a lot weaker. And as you mentioned, there weren't those tools that could give you that could put you on the same level. Now there are. And you don't need to know. You could be someone that's totally, obtuse when it comes to like baseball knowledge. If you were to just run the Sims and take 150 lineups and put them in, your chances of winning are, like, compared to someone who knows nothing about baseball, it's unbelievable. Because the difference about Morgan, the difference, and from like sports betting to DFS is if you're just blindly firing on, let's say, NFL sides, you probably just end up bleeding out to the VIG. If you blindly fire in DFS, you will never make any money back, and you'll have zero. Like, before you can blink your eyes, you'll have nothing left after just a couple slates. So the tool's putting you in an advantageous position, but then, like you said, using that information to understand what your opponent's doing. It sounds like what you're saying is that's actually the ticket right there, not just using the tools, but understanding what people who use the tools are also going to do.
And I think also it's probably the biggest thing, and people do talk about this, but they don't understand it. It's emotional control and bankroll management. So I went into this ultimate main event with, $50,000 worth of volume, which is a very big day for me. I'm not, a super duper high roller where I'm like, oh, I'm just going to fire $50,000 off today, with a bunch of head-to-heads and stuff. Mm-hmm. Before the day started, I told myself I was going to go wide, which is I was going to have a bunch of different lineups and a bunch of different pitchers, and I was going to get some money back. And then I started using the tools, and I just shook my head and said, well, here we go. Like, we're, jump into the deep end. I went super narrow. And the reason for that, and this is about the emotional control too, there was just some clear spots to me on where I wanted to be. And the tools were showing this. You're talking about the tools. And I'm like, well, if I get zero back, I get zero back. And right. and I had to be okay with that at 2 p.m. Where and I couldn't second guess it and everything. I was just like, it was just so clearly the right move. People throw out the term EV. Most people don't know what that actually means. It means expected value. Yeah. So my expected value of every dollar, every ticket I had, if I went wide versus going narrow on that day, was just a no-brainer. So I was like, well, there's going to be a lot of slates. And this is another thing people have to realize. So on that ultimate main event slate, I got 1st, 5th, 10th, and 11th out of like 1,300 people with 12 entries. So not even the full amount. And that's because I was narrow. Those lineups were similar. I actually really wanted the 10th place lineup to win. I wanted it to win because it had Tanner Gordon, the pitcher for the Rockies. I was the only person in the whole 1,300 people that played Tanner Gordon.
That's great.
No, he was 0.15%, and it was 3 of mine.
It was you.
It was me.
It was. I have an idea where you're going here. You're about to say there's another world where you zero out in that contest as well.
Well, Houston scores 15. They win the slate. Hunter Brown's your pitcher. 5 stacks of Houston. I had no 5 stacks of Houston because I played. Oh, that's the other thing. A lot of people, even really good DFS players, go both ways. They'll play the stack and the pitcher. Mm-hmm. I rarely do that just because I'm not comfortable with it. I understand why. I get the game theory behind it. And, a lot of DFS is just game theory. And if people don't super understand game theory, there's a bunch of really cool YouTube videos to go watch before you play DFS. Go look up like Prisoner's Dilemma and like the bots that cooperate or not cooperate and to earn points. That's also DFS, truly. But there's a world, Laffy, where I not only get zero back, Tanner Gordon's minus 12. You need Houston to win the slate. And then I get zero back. And that's the other thing. You have to be emotionally comfortable with that. What I want to tell your viewers, so the 3 slates since the ultimate main event, I haven't had, like a winner's hangover. I haven't been going crazy. I didn't go out to the bar or anything. I've gotten $0 back in the 3 slates since then. I didn't change a thing. My process is not different or anything. I just, like yesterday, I played the evening slate. I didn't have the Phillies, and the Phillies
needed to fill. Schwarber would have helped last night.
Yeah, and you have to be okay with that. That's back to the bankroll management too. you have to go into probably every slate for DFS thinking you're going to lose everything. And that means you have to only put out on the table, a very small percentage of your bankroll, whatever you're comfortable with, because you have to, going into it, basically, I'm not Buddhist, but I think if you were Buddhist, it would really help DFS play. You have to release it to the world and say, I am comfortable with this money never coming back to me. And I think that's probably one of the hardest things about DFS too, because a lot of people that play are so competitive and they think they're God's gift to everything. And, they played sports in high school or maybe college or maybe even professional athletes, hyper competitive people. And, you even said earlier, well, I'm not always the smartest person in the room. Well, that normally means you were one of the smartest people in the room. It's just one of those humble brags, but you like being in rooms with people even smarter than you. But I guess what I would say to that is that that's probably even one of the biggest mistakes people make in DFS is thinking that they're going to like consistently get money back. So like you said, I come from a poker background. The best poker players in the world in tournaments, they cash 11 to 13.5% of the time. And DFS is similar. So you have to be comfortable, that 9 out of 10 times you don't make $1. But what that means conversely is that when you do well, you have to do well. And what I mean by that is pick a lineup that can win. Truly pick a lineup that can win. Because, if you get like one of my buddies, I jokingly called him the best baseball player in the world in June. He had like 10 fifths in the big contest. You know what fifth pays, Luffy?
Yeah, not great. Like 10 grand.
No, in like an 888. Do you know what it's less?
No, in the 888, probably like 2,500.
Yeah, it's like 4K or something.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it's not great.
Yeah, and then first is 100K.
Right. Oh yeah, it's you. And I promise you, by the way, when I say I'm not the smartest guy in the room, I can assure you. Well, it depends on the room. Right? But in these circles, definitely not. And I like that because I want to learn from people. Learning from you listening to this right now. But there is one thing we have in common that I talk about often on the show. And, I do a lot of top-down betting as well, like market-based betting. If you're not comfortable with being uncomfortable, if you're not comfortable with sometimes what seems counterintuitive is actually the right decision, then you're probably better off doing something else that's a little bit more conservative, just quietly investing your money in the SPY or something like that and taking your 5-6% or whatever it may be. But if you don't have the ability, and it's not easy to do, by the way, like to pretend that it's easy to just kind of flick a switch and become robotic and accept sometimes like what the tools are telling you, or accept that these amount of bets in volume over time are going to make you profitable. All of that, it's not an easy thing to do. And I think those emotional constraints where you can't flick the switch on in one direction or the other is what holds a lot of people back. And it's hard to blame them, man, because you don't want to do something knowing that you have hard-earned money on the line that feels like the wrong decision, even though what your head is typically telling you DFS is the wrong decision.
Well, you know what I compare that to? When people walk into a casino and one of the first things in the casino is the roulette wheel, and the roulette wheel has that board, where they have the running tallies of the black, red, and green. I was sitting there with a friend of mine one time, just enjoying a cocktail. We were at like the Frankenstein machine, those Frankenstein slot machines. And I was just listening to people talk about the roulette board. What's funny about that is they all interpreted it differently. So they would get this data, which doesn't even mean anything. It's just, how the black and reds have come out in the zeros. And some people would say, oh, it's been black 7 times in a row. It has to be red. And then someone else would say, oh, it's been black 7 times in a row. It has to be black.
Black again, yeah.
So it's just interesting. The whole reason it's there is that because it feeds into our own biases, right? We'll believe what we want to believe. And it's just interesting that, it's this weird, like self-fulfilling prophecy. Casinos put it there because it makes them money. Because the honest to God truth, which people don't want to accept, is that every dollar you put on the roulette wheel, depending on the roulette wheel, you're getting between 88 cents and like 96 cents back. You are never beating the roulette wheel. A good example also is Keno. The only way to beat Keno, Laffy?
No, never played Keno.
Okay, so there's one way to beat Keno. This is the only way in the world, and it's the only statistically proven way. You go sit down at one of those Keno places, like old school in Vegas, like an off-strip casino. The Keno woman, who doesn't really exist anymore post-COVID, but they used to have like waitresses that would have the Keno cards and take your card and everything. Do you remember that?
Yeah, but I've never played Keno.
Okay, well, here's the only way to beat Keno. You put in a $5 Keno card, like 7 picks or something. You win on your very first try, and you never play again.
You're saying it's otherwise there's no chance of beating it.
None. Zero.
Yeah.
And something like roulette is similar. So, and something like baccarat's similar, unless you're Phil Ivey. And that's a whole different ball of wax, which is a 40-minute conversation, which we don't have to get into, about like card sorting and that sort of thing. No, I guess my point is that you have to your point, you have to take your biases out of it, because if you literally think you can beat roulette or beat Keno, or that the roulette board is telling you something, you've gone off the deep end, and you need to figure something else out. I guess similar in DFS, you have to be so comfortable with losing. You were saying about being comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's the other thing I would tell people, is that, it sounds really weird, but like, if you can't be comfortable with losing, I don't care how smart you are, I don't care how well you can use the tools and everything else, you're going to go broke. Because then if you have, 5-6 losing days in a row, you're going to chase, you're going to like play a bigger stake than you're used to, and you're going to put it all on the line. You're going to go all in on black, and it's going to come out red. And then you're going to sit there and wonder what happened.
And I think what else you're going to do is you'll subconsciously start just playing what are in your mind like safer lineups. Yep. And those safer lineups, you might min cash on them, but most of the time you're not. And in NFL and in any of those sports, it's really tough, man. Like it's really difficult. I want to change course here for a second. So you said you're going to try and pull those screenshots for me. I'll hold you to that. See what you can do. We obviously have the one from the main event, but 7 6-figure wins this year. How many were from baseball and how many were from other sports? And do you intend on getting into the NFL streets when we kick it off next week?
Well, absolutely on the NFL streets. No, I like playing all the sports. Actually, I'm wearing my Gunther jersey right now.
Yeah, a little Utah action.
Yeah. The official, by the way, Fanatics makes terrible official jerseys. I think the cheapo one, this is an official like $200 Utah jersey. I think the knockoffs from China were nicer. So Fanatics needs to get their
many knockoffs, and they're better. Not hockey, but baseball, and you get them for like $50, and no one knows the difference.
Yeah, this is the official like hologrammed logo from the Utah team store that I bought at a game. They need to get their shit together, is what I would say there. But no, yeah, in shitification, but that's another topic. We don't have to get into that. No, I like playing all the sports. Actually, my favorite DFS sport to play is hockey. And I wish there were bigger prize pools in hockey, but not enough people play. It's the same reason that the MLB prize pools are going to go down to like 10, 20K next week, because everybody wants to play football. The sites know that there's only so much interest and so many dollars to spread around. So they have to be pretty conservative. What's funny is last year, a lot of the hockey tournaments filled. So I would even like talk to my rep and stuff. I'm like, can you talk to the execs? Can we get bigger hockey prize pools?
Yeah, right.
No, yeah, my favorite DFS sport is hockey. But I guess one of my favorite reasons for that, which is kind of weird, and I don't know if it's a chicken or egg thing. One, I think hockey isn't as solved yet. So that's one. And I'm pretty comfortable with what I do in hockey. And then two, it's my favorite sport to watch. So that's the other thing, back to like, why do people play DFS to begin with? I don't want to think that I fall victim to that, but I think I do a little bit. I love sweating hockey. So I want to have a lineup every night.
I get it. That's how I am with football.
Yeah.
I totally understand it. It makes it more enjoyable, something you already enjoy. Before we go, I wanted to ask you one more thing. You said you have a pretty extensive history in poker prior to DFS. What else did you do outside of poker?
Yeah, so I dropped out of college to play poker.
Okay.
My family was very unhappy with that. So I dropped out of poker to go back to college. And I finished my degree at like 27, which at the time felt really, really old. I thought like I was so far behind my peers and I would never catch up.
What did you get a degree in?
American Studies. So it's
cool.
political science and econ.
Love it.
I think my graduating class of American Studies was 11, and 9 went on to be lawyers. 1 went on to get a master's of public policy in like healthcare, which is a great degree, actually. I wish I went and did that because hospital administrators make bank. And then I don't know, I'm here.
Yeah, well, it worked out. A little unconventional, but I'd say you're doing okay. And also, you're probably having the most fun out of anybody.
I don't know, maybe. But yeah, no, we're wrapping this up. So before you go, I just wanted to say, one thing, because you were saying about like, hey, are you going to spill the tea or, tell any secrets or whatever? And we talked about a couple things. I guess the one thing I would say about DFS and using the tools too, so this is really important with stochastic, is, we already talked about understanding your opponents. We're not going to have time to get into like how to actually use the tools. We've talked about game theory a lot, but here's a game theory adjacent thing that you have to use in DFS, and you have to be comfortable with it, which is back to similar to, the emotional control and the bankroll. So the ultimate main event, Lofty, it had 1,300 people, right? So I talked about this, just touched on it briefly, but I didn't play any Hunter Brown and I didn't play any Rockies. And Hunter Brown was, and this is the most important thing in the tools, is the projected ownership. That's number one. So the first thing I look at every day is what's the projected ownership? And then I make decisions based off that. And you were talking about football coming up. This is even more important in football than baseball, guys. Football is the ultimate ownership sport, because a lot of things, being equal, it's ownership that's the most important thing. So what I do, and what I would encourage everybody to look at, is that I want to do something called shrinking the field. So in a 1,300 player contest, I want to make it so I actually have a chance to win. And so I'll do something with my lineups, and it's different every time, but you got to figure out what works for you to give myself a chance to, I said earlier, I got lucky. That's true. I got lucky, but I got lucky in a much smaller contest. I played like Patrick Corbin at 6%, and he was the answer. So, and a lot of people probably played Patrick Corbin with, Hunter Brown. So I probably had 98% of the field gone already, right? So I'm only competing now with 1 to 2% of the field. So instead of 1,300 people, which is, you're not going to win a contest with 1,300 people, I was competing with like 26. And that's the key to DFS, is that if I tell you, Lofty, you're going to compete with 1,300 people for $1 million, you'd go, okay, dart throw. We were talking about carnival games before we came on. Yeah, it's not going to happen. It's a lottery ticket, whatever. If I told you, Lofty, you're going to compete with 26 people for $1 million.
Sounds good.
Well, that's real, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the key to DFS, is that you want to shrink the pool. Even in these massive NFL pools, make it so that if things go right for you, if your parlay starts to hit, give yourself a chance. So you got to do something different ownership wise that puts you from, an ocean to like a swimming pool at your local YMCA.
I love it. And as they say, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. So you got lucky, but you didn't get lucky for being stupid. You got lucky because you positioned yourself, as you said, to narrow down the field, and with a couple variables involved. But if a couple things went your way, then you were in the fast lane to being in a really good spot. So, man, Morgan, I really appreciate it, dude. Usually these are like 15 minutes, but we had a great conversation. I think you a lot of really valuable stuff that people can take from this. And hey, I wish you the continued success, man. Hope to keep seeing you in the shows and everything when NFL rolls around. And I really appreciate you doing this.
Hey, Lofty, thanks for having me, and good luck to everybody, because your listeners and your viewers, they're trying to be the best they can be, and I wish them all the best of luck too, because we got to keep the lights on.
Yeah, we do. And I don't want to volunteer you for this. I can cut this out if you say no, but he's not a big social media guy, but at Morgan Wiper, WIPER, is over on Twitter. If you have any questions you want to shoot his way, nah, we don't have to.
No. You can go for it. Keep it in.
Yeah. Okay.
Keep it in.
He's a good man. Good man. I figure there's a lot of people that see this stuff and they're like, I've been trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
There may be like one small thing they ask you that changes the way that they process all of this. So feel free to mute them. Otherwise, feel free to block them all. I don't care. Appreciate you guys watching. Thanks again, Morgan. And we'll see you guys back here for the next one.